Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Friday, December 13th. We have a huge show for you today. Of course, every Friday, we go over our NFL game picks as well as the game picks for college football. This week, just being the Army-Navy game. We'll go over both of those as well as breaking down the results from what was a boring but really eventful and really important, actually, Thursday night game between the Rams and the 49ers last night. And we're going to talk a little bit about the MLB. Two massive trades have dropped tonight. We will talk about both of those, what the results are, and who won those trades. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Friday, December 13th. But like I was saying, we're going to kick off our show with a little bit of a recap from Thursday night football last night. A boring game, a snooze fest, if you will, one that ended 12-6. No touchdowns were scored in this one. Very low offensive output, especially for two teams coming off of some of their highest offensive outputs of the season. The 49ers dropping 38 on the Bears' heads, winning by 25 points in that one, and the Rams winning by 2 in a 44-42 shootout versus the Rams, versus the Bills. This is a much different game than we got between both of those teams that we had tonight. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that that game was super entertaining. There was rain in the first half that made the offense go just about nowhere, and then it was just field goal off in the second half, which isn't necessarily a great It's not necessarily a great entertainment outcome. But what this game did was, first of all, very important on the Rams side for the playoffs. Not just the Rams, but also the 49ers. The Rams now improved to 8-6 on the year. That puts them half a game out of the playoffs in both the division behind the Seattle Seahawks and that 7 seed behind the Washington Commanders. And when you compare the schedule of the Rams and the Commanders, it's going to be very interesting down the stretch here. Now, obviously, the Rams have a game ahead of the Commanders here. So if the Commanders end up winning on Sunday, which I assume they're going to do against the New Orleans Saints, we then have to look at the schedule ahead, right? The Rams have the Jets, bad team. The Cardinals and the Seahawks to end the season. That is a tough stretch, 2 of those division games, but we'll say that they could potentially go 3-1 over their last 4 games. We'll just give one of those division games a loss, right? The Commanders have the Saints, the Eagles, the Falcons, and the Cowboys. 2 division games. Anything can happen. We'll say they go 1-1 in those games. They probably beat the Saints, but then that Falcons game is going to be up in the air. If they end up losing that Falcons game, it's going to go to tiebreakers. I do believe the Commanders have the tiebreaker in that one, but it's going to be very important if it gets to that point, how the other teams that they've played on their schedule or who they end up losing to really does make a difference here. When we're looking at the playoff scenario for the Rams as far as the division goes, they probably have the best chance. Again, we went through the Rams schedule. The Seahawks have half a game on the Rams. They have Green Bay on Sunday Night Football. Then they have Minnesota, then the Bears, and then the Rams. That Rams game on Week 18 could decide the division. The 49ers, they fall to 6-8, and their season is just about done. They've got a really tough schedule. They have to play the Dolphins, who are red hot, the Detroit Lions, who have won 11 straight, and then they end in a division game on the road in Arizona. So they're just about out at this point, but they can still find a way in. For the Rams, I'd say they probably make the playoffs after that. Now, again, a lot of things still need to go right, but I do think they'll end up winning that division after what happened in that San Francisco game. But the more interesting conversations coming out of this game, and I think just in general, there were 2 big conversations that came out of this game for my part, is for the San Francisco 49ers. First of all, a loss here kind of cements that their season is done. They can still find a way in if a bunch of things go right. They're not officially eliminated, but definitely makes the path a whole lot harder. So we take a look at it now. What are the two big questions that came out of this game? The two big storylines that came out of this game for the San Francisco 49ers. And I'm going to start with the one that is more in the present, more in the current timeline. You had linebacker Devondre Campbell make a scene in the third quarter walking off the field. They say he just did not want to play. He basically retired mid-game. Now, this is in response to getting Dre Greenlaw back. Dre Greenlaw, a all-pro level linebacker, arguably the best player on that defense, a defense that is filled with Fred Warner, with Nick Bosa, with plenty of huge talents on that defensive side of the ball. And Dre Greenlaw is the guy that, as you saw in that first half, made a huge difference. He stopped the Rams' run game, especially from going. And when he came out of that game in the second half, that's when Kyren Williams started pulling off his 6, 7, 8-yard runs that he was getting down the stretch there. That is the effect of a Dre Greenlaw. And that's what was missing from a 49ers defense all season, and really even down the stretch in the Super Bowl, where he tore his Achilles coming off the sideline in a heartbreaking injury. But now you have Devondre Campbell, a guy who they signed off the Packers, who was playing good football, right? But he gets demoted because the starter's back, right? He's back to being a bench linebacker, and he clearly did not take that well. And that's one of those things that I just don't understand. You know what you signed up for when you signed with the San Francisco 49ers. Regardless of how good you were playing, you can't just walk off the field halfway through the game and say, nah, I'm not feeling it. You can't do that. That is unacceptable for a player really at any level, but especially at the NFL level. That's something that's just not okay. Not only for the context of just any NFL team, but this NFL team in particular. Obviously, this is a team that's dealt with a lot of injuries, but not just on the field stuff, not just with fellow linebacker Fred Warner, who's playing through a broken ankle right now. He said he's playing with a broken ankle. He gets a shot before every game, and he's still playing just about every single snap. That's a guy that is doing his best for a bad team right now, right? But also off the field stuff. You have Charvarius Ward, who lost a kid earlier this season. Ricky Pearsall, who got shot at the beginning of the year. Trent Williams, who's hurt right now but still trying to come back, going through rehab, also lost a kid earlier this year. That is a lot of stuff going on around this specific organization, one that you just came in off of free agency, and now you're quitting because you're not starting anymore. It's a bad look. And it's not just a bad look for this year. He is probably cut. I haven't seen the alert yet, but I assume he's going to be cut within the weekend. And I also assume that this is going to be basically the end of his NFL career. You're telling me that any team, regardless of how needy they are at linebacker, is going to say, yes, Devondre Campbell, please come over here. You are a guy that we would love to welcome into the locker room, after having this be so loudly proclaimed that he just gave up on his team in the middle of a game that if they had won could have propelled them to the playoffs. They were not out of it yet, and they still technically aren't. But that is a massive, massive bad spot on him, and I don't think he sees the field for at least a year now. That is not good for his career. And he's uber talented, so it sucks to lose a guy like that. But if you're not going to fit into the locker room, if you're just going to walk off when you're done and you don't feel like it, there's not going to be a lot of teams that give you the chance. And the other big thing, the other big question that came out of this is more of a season-long question for the San Francisco 49ers. It surrounds quarterback Brock Purdy. He has not had his best season. He has not had his best year by any stretch of the imagination. Really, everyone on the 49ers has had a down year. Injuries wrecking that team, especially in the running back room, especially on the defensive side of the ball. The wide receiver room also dealing with a lot of injuries. But Brock Purdy is a guy that was in MVP conversations last year. And now you're coming to the point where you have to decide whether or not it's worth him, whether or not it's worth to pay Brock Purdy $50-60 million. And this is an interesting decision, right? Because the 49ers have been a relatively expensive team, but they've been able to do that and build this core because they haven't had to pay a quarterback. Now you're going to have to give $55-60 million to a guy in Brock Purdy that we're looking at and we're saying, I'm not sure if he can handle it. He had a bad game. threw a really bad interception to seal it at the end. He overthrew a bunch of his receivers. He's a guy who's usually on target and super accurate, and it's not all on him. Debo had a couple drops there, wasn't his best game. He took a sack there at the end. Can't do that. I know, again, not all on him, but this is a San Francisco 49ers team that needs to make this decision, and they need to make this decision quickly because it's almost time. Time is running out. Are you going to move on from your last pick in the draft quarterback, a guy that's led you to the Super Bowl, a guy that's been super successful at winning games, but you've seemed to be able to plug and play quarterbacks? Jimmy Garoppolo also took you to a Super Bowl, and you see what happens when he left that system. Now, I'm not saying that Brock Purdy is Jimmy G. I think that he is much better than Jimmy Garoppolo, but I'm not saying he's a guy that's worth paying that top dollar quarterback money to. If you're able to get him on a cheaper deal, maybe like a $30 to $40 million contract, something in the range of what Baker Mayfield got, do it. That's the way that it needs to be done. But if you can't get him unless he signs a record-setting deal, which if you're Brock Purdy, that's totally fair and acceptable to ask for. There is a real shot that the 49ers might have to consider moving off him and thinking of a backup plan. Now is the time in the season when you've all but been eliminated for you to say, hey, maybe it's time for us to seriously think about our future. Is Brock Purdy going to be a part of it? I don't know if he's going to be. It's a tough decision. They have another year technically, but generally you get these things figured out the season before they are able to hit free agency. But we will see. Let me know what you think. Is Brock Purdy going to be a Niner? Is he going to sign a big contract? Is it worth it? I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we turn our attention to the rest of the NFL slate. A full slate of games. We have 15 more games to go through. We will break all of them down coming up next here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Friday, December 13th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the Thursday night football game and the implications of it from both sides, both the Rams and the San Francisco 49ers. In this segment, we turn our attention to the rest of the NFL football slate. 15 more games to go through. We go and break all of them down and give a score prediction. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Friday, December 13th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the NFL game picks here. We've got 15 to go through this week, a full slate, no more bye weeks. We are all done with those. Finally, we get the final stretch of the season. The home stretch is here. We're going to start off in what is really a kind of week 1 o'clock slate. There's a really strong 4 o'clock slate, but the 1 o'clock slate this week in the NFL is pretty bad. We're going to start off with the Giants traveling to Baltimore to take on the Ravens. The Ravens are 16-point favorites. That's one of the biggest favorites we have seen all season, and it's for good reason. The Giants over here are going back to Tommy DeVito after Drew Lock is in a walking boot after sustaining an injury last week against the Saints. I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference, good or bad, for the Giants. We've seen a Baltimore Ravens defense play much better as of late, and a run defense for the Giants that, while they did play good against the Saints, has been torched by a lot of the teams that they have played. Derrick Henry should have a huge day. Lamar Jackson should have a huge day. They win this one really easily. I actually think they find a way to cover this 3-possession game, which is crazy. They win 13-31. The other New York team taking on a game that they probably can win. They travel down to Jacksonville to take on the Jaguars. They're favored in this one by 3.5 points. The Jags come off a big win. They're now kind of out of the running for that number 1 overall pick. Now, anything can happen. They don't necessarily need a quarterback, so maybe it's not the worst spot to be for them, but still a tough game to win, I guess, for them last week against the Titans. Mac Jones, that offense was still not very effective, only putting up 10 points. I think the Jags defense just ran into a bad Titans offense, and I think the way that Aaron Rodgers is playing specifically last week, going over 300 yards, his best game since he joined the New York Jets, really. Since 2021, he hadn't done it something like that. I think they're going to parlay that into a pretty good game, staying down in the state of Florida. I think they win 24-17. Then we have the Dallas Cowboys traveling to take on Bryce Young and the Carolina Panthers. The Carolina Panthers have been this close to winning 3 straight games, potentially 5 straight games. They obviously lose in overtime to the Bucs in a game that, again, I think they won because Adam Thielen caught that touchdown at the end of the half. A game that they lose on a last-second field goal to the 2-time defending Super Bowl champion Chiefs, and a game that they lose because a dropped pass after a pretty good attempt at a game-winning drive from Bryce Young. All 1-possession games against some of the top teams in the NFL right now. Now they get a team in the Dallas Cowboys, who you could pretty easily categorize as not one of the top teams in the NFL right now. Cooper Rush did not have his best game, and they were pretty much held in check by a lot of the Bengals defense on Monday Night Football. Not a good look for them. The Carolina defense is not much better, and I don't think Carolina is going to run away with this one, but I do think they finally get that 1-possession win that's been so elusive to them over the past couple of weeks. They get a big win at home over the Dallas Cowboys, winning 21-23. Up next, the Washington Commanders travel to the Saints, a revenge game. We finally get Marshawn Lattimore making his debut for the Washington Commanders after being traded to them at the trade deadline. Washington favored by 8 points in this one. This is going to be a not great matchup. Jake Haener has been named the starting quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. We saw how well that went last time he was in there. Not super excited for this Saints offense without Derek Carr. Maybe they can get a little bit going against a Washington defense that has been able to give up some points. But Brian Robinson should have a massive day against this Saints unit. Jaden Daniels, we saw what happened last time they went up against a bad defense in the Titans. I think they absolutely wreck shop. I think they put up the most points this week by anybody. I think they win 40-27. The Cincinnati Bengals then travel to the Tennessee Titans. Both of these teams don't really have much on defense. Offense for Cincinnati is amazing. They should put up a lot of points. Tennessee, on the other hand, they've got spotty offense. If they come in and they play the way that we know that they can, this could be a fun shootout of a game. But it doesn't always happen that way. We saw that especially last week, case in point, when they were only able to put up 6 points against what really is a bad Jaguars defense. Now, I don't necessarily think they're going to be that bad again, but I don't think they're going to have the offensive firepower to deal with Joe Burrow and the Bengals. That being said, Cincinnati favored by 5.5. I think they still cover this one. They win 31-24. Another one in the early window. Again, none of these are really that great. There's only one game in the early window that I'm super interested in, and it's the last one. But this one, Kansas City travels to Cleveland. The Browns under Jameis Winston are always going to be fun, and Kansas City's been playing with fire. I think this is one where they really are on upset alert here. Kansas City favored by 4 in this one. Maybe Jameis has a day and finds a way to beat Kansas City, especially at home in the dog pound over there. I think there's a real shot. This one is absolutely on upset alert, but I'm taking Kansas City to win. They're favored by 4 in this one. I think they win 27-24. So not quite covering, but I think again, this is one of those games that I'm absolutely putting on upset alert. Then the final game in the 1 o'clock window. This one has huge implications for the NFL playoffs. If Houston wins this game and Indianapolis loses in the second window, that means that Houston clinches their division. Houston is taking on Miami. If the Miami Dolphins win that game, they continue their pursuit to find a way into the playoffs. They have the tiebreaker over a lot of different teams if they're able to finish with the same record, and this win against Houston would be huge if they're able to get it. The way that Miami played, especially in a comeback effort against a good defense of the Jets, was super impressive to me. I think Miami's going to find a way to win this, potentially on a walk-off field goal. I think they win by 1 point, 24-23. And getting into the late window here, it is absolutely stacked. There are lots of great games, 5 of them in the late window. 4 of them, I would say, have the potential to be really, really good. The first one, another one with huge, huge playoff implications in the AFC as the Indianapolis Colts travel to Denver to take on Bo Nix and the Broncos. The Broncos favored by 4 points in this one. Let's break down the playoff scenarios for you here. The Colts at 6-7 are the first team out right now. The Broncos at 8-5 are the last team in. This is a battle between the 7 and the 8 seeds in the AFC, and this is one that could be a huge decider for tiebreaker. The Colts, after this game, have a pretty cupcake schedule. The Tennessee Titans, the New York Giants, the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Broncos, on the other hand, have 2 division games against the Chargers and the Chiefs, and then they take on Cincinnati on the road. None of those games are going to be easy for the Broncos. Not saying they're going to lose all of them, but there really is a chance that they could, especially with the way the defense didn't look so good against the Browns last time out. I'm not sure if Bo Nix can do what he did against the Browns week in and week out. This is going to be a really fun game. The question is, can Anthony Richardson get it going on the ground? We've seen him get it going the last couple of weeks. He obviously came up huge against the New England Patriots last week, leading a game-winning drive, scoring that 2-point conversion last time out. This is going to be maybe the game of the week with the most playoff implications on the line here. I'm taking the Indianapolis Colts to upset Denver at home 25-24. Continuing in the late window, I think this is probably the most disappointing one of the late window, but still a chance to be a good game as the New England Patriots travel to Arizona to take on the Cardinals. A cross-country flight, it's a thing you have to pay attention to, but playing at 4 o'clock, it shouldn't be as much of an issue as playing at 1. Now, Arizona has been really disappointing offensively. I think this is a get-right game for them, for Kyler Murray, potentially a huge game for Marvin Harrison Jr. That's one that I'm looking at. James Conner should have a big day. I don't know how much of an offensive explosion it's going to be, but the way that defense for Arizona has been playing in the second half of the season, I think they're going to do enough to slow down Drake May, although he should also have a good day, and I think Arizona finds a way to get a win 23-17. Again, another contender for game of the week is up next, that being the Buffalo Bills. After a game of the week performance last week in a shootout with their Los Angeles Rams, have a chance to do it again. They travel to Detroit to take on the Lions. The Lions come into this game as 2.5-point favorites. They've won 11 straight. The Bills, coming off of that brutal loss last week where some time management issues were had. I don't think they'll have the same issue, but the way that the Bills have been able to be beaten all season is on the ground with the rushing attack because they play a lot of cover too. They don't crowd the box. And what's the one thing the Lions like to do the most? It's run the football. David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs should have huge days in the office, and I think the Lions behind them find a way to win this one in another kind of shootout game, 30-34. Tampa Bay travels to Los Angeles. Again, cross country there at 4 o'clock shouldn't make too much of a difference. The Bucks are hot. One of the hottest teams in all of the NFL right now. The Chargers, I'm not so sure how healthy they're going to be, and that's going to be a huge issue when they don't have the run game going. Justin Herbert has a lot on his shoulders, and we saw what happens. They find a way to win in Atlanta with an injured Lad McConkey. Without Lad McConkey, they can't do it in another one-possession game against the Chiefs. I think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers pull off the upset here. They win 27-20. And the final one in the late window, the Battle of Pennsylvania. Cross-state rivals, the Pittsburgh Steelers take on the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles dealing with some internal turmoil. The Steelers are a team that has a very dangerous defense. This is a game that I think could be low scoring. There's also a chance that with both of these defenses, two of the best in all of football, the Eagles being the best one, that they just kind of throw punches at each other all day. I think this is going to be a really fun one to watch. Without George Pickens, that just was announced. I think it's going to be a little tough for the Steelers to win this one. I'm taking the Eagles to win 28-21. And getting into the Sunday night football matchup, the Green Bay Packers take on the Seattle Seahawks. The Green Bay Packers favored by 2.5 points in this one. I just think flat out they're a better team. As good as the Seahawks have been playing as of late, as good as that defense especially has been playing as of late, and I want to give them all their flowers, all their credit for that. I still think Green Bay, they're getting some wide receiver help back in the form of Romeo Doubs. He's coming back. I think we're going to have a big game out of Jordan Love in this one, and I think the Green Bay Packers find a way to eke this one out, 27-24. And a doubleheader on Monday night. How about that? Chicago at Minnesota. Minnesota favored by 7, and Atlanta at Las Vegas. Atlanta favored by 4. Divisional matchup should be fun. Anything can happen. The Bears looking to stop a brutal skid now at almost 8 games. I believe they're at 7 games in a row. That ties the Saints for, I believe, the longest losing streak this season. Chicago, nothing's going right for them, and against a good Minnesota defense, I don't think that changes. Minnesota wins this one 30-20. In the last game of the week, Atlanta taking on Las Vegas. Desmond Ridder, potentially a quarterback. You also have the potential of an injured Aiden O'Connell back there. Doesn't speak volumes to me, and that defense just isn't good enough. I think Max Crosby has a huge day, but at the end of the day, it's not going to make a difference. Atlanta wins 28-14. But let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts of any of these games in the comments. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we turn our attention to the world of college football. The awards show was last night. A bunch of copycat awards. We're going to talk about what that might mean for the big awards that have yet to be announced. The Heisman, for instance. We'll talk about that and more coming up next here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Friday, December 13th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the NFL game picks this week, went through a full slate, all 16 games. In this segment, we turn our attention to college football. The awards show came out last night. Lots of awards, a couple of repeats. We're going to talk about what that means for the big awards like the Heisman that's going to be announced on Saturday. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Friday, December 13th. But like I was saying, we're going to get into some college football awards. There were some controversy over there. There were two awards in particular that had some controversy, and we're going to start right there. It's two players that I think should be taken a lot more seriously, not saying just because they're not in the Power 4 conference doesn't mean they don't deserve these awards. And we're going to start off with the wide receiver award. Travis Hunter won the Biletnikoff Award for the best wide receiver in the country. Now, generally, that would be fine. He put up a good season, almost 1,000 yards receiving, 14 touchdowns, while also playing both ways. But when you're looking at the Biletnikoff, you're only looking at one side of the ball. You're looking purely at who was the best wide receiver in the country. And in another year, maybe those stats, 14 touchdowns is nothing to scoff at, is enough to give him the nod. And sure, he deserved to be in consideration. But when you have a guy like Nick Nash out of San Jose State, and I know not a big school, not a guy getting a lot of coverage, but he is a guy that for just the fourth time in FBS history had the achievement of the Triple Crown at wide receiver. That's leading the nation in catches, touchdowns, and yards. He's leading the nation in a whole bunch of other categories, but for just the fourth time ever in the history of the FBS, a guy has completed the Triple Crown, and he did not get the Biletnikoff Award. That is crazy to me, as good as Travis Hunter is. And I think he's potentially the best player in college football. And we'll get to the Heisman in a little bit, but he's in Heisman consideration for a reason. He's also not the best receiver. The reason that he's in Heisman consideration, the reason that we're talking about him so much is not because just he plays wide receiver, but it's because he does both. He plays wide receiver at an elite level. He plays cornerback at an elite level. Both of those two combined make him that special player, not just his wide receiving skills. He can be a top 5 receiver in the nation, but the best one, absolutely not. The Biletnikoff this year needed to go to Nick Nash out of San Jose State, and they need to change. I know they can't change that, but they need to provide more attention to some of these smaller schools. A similar thing ended up happening in the tight end award when we're talking about the Jake Mackey Award, right? The tight end out of Penn State, Tyler Warren, got that award. Again, a good tight end, a solid tight end, but there was one tight end out of Bowling Green, Harold Fannin Jr., who absolutely destroyed every single other tight end. He was up there second in the nation in receptions, not just in tight ends, but second in the nation, period, behind Nick Nash. He is a guy that was the entire offense, and he was by far the best tight end in the country. I understand if you want to talk about lesser competition, but it shouldn't matter that much. When you have a guy that's doing the things that he's doing at the tight end position, he is going to be a special player later on. He's a guy that's going to get real consideration in the NFL draft, and to snub him from this award, despite being head and shoulders, knees and toes above this guy, Tyler Warren from Penn State, is just sad. He plays at Bowling Green. But these guys that vote for awards, they need to be watching all of college football. And it's a thing that people like to talk about a lot when they get to award show. Hey, these guys aren't watching the games. They aren't seeing what we're seeing. And there's a lot to watch. There's no doubt about it. But you should at least be able to keep up with the storylines. There is this guy who's breaking tight end records around the country, and he's not getting that John Mackey award. It does not make any sense to me. He is someone that I think should have absolutely won that award, and I don't think that one had any question involved. The Nick Nash one, I can understand it a little bit. As much as I think it's a cool accomplishment to get that Triple Crown, and as much as it's a hard thing to do, when you're talking about comparable-ish numbers, Travis Hunter did have that, and he played against the Big 12, which, if you want to take that into consideration, I'm actually not super mad about Nick Nash not winning the Biletnikoff. Would I have given it to Travis Hunter? Probably not. I think there's a lot of other guys that were deserving. But to not give Harold Fannin Jr. that award is ridiculous. He absolutely deserved it. Nobody in the country was close to as good of a tight end as he is, and he should be the first tight end drafted this year in the NFL. A couple other things that I think are really interesting to pay attention to as we get into the Heisman race. It's the 3 different Player of the Year awards that they give out. Now, obviously, the AP gives out a Player of the Year award. You have the Football Writers of America giving out an award. You also have a 3rd Player of the Year award. Ashton Jeanty got one of them. The other 2 both went to Travis Hunter. And this is where we get into our Heisman discussion a little bit, right? The Heisman is super fun this year, right? You have, for the first time in a very, very long time, not just quarterbacks in consideration. And it's something that I'm really impressed with this season. Not only the fact that you have a group of 5 guy in Ashton Jeanty, a guy who could break Barry Sanders' single-season rushing record in the playoff game. He needs less than 200 yards for a guy that's averaging around 200 yards a game. This is a really cool thing, because not only do you have Ashton Jeanty, you have Travis Hunter, who, as we talked about, plays both offense and defense, and it's a phenomenal ability of his to do it at an elite level on both sides, not really taking breaks. His motor is incredible. He is the best player in college football, in my opinion, and as good as Ashton Jeanty is, he kind of fell off a little bit down the stretch there due to injuries, but as much as Travis Hunter is playing, he never once really seemed to lose or dip in production, which is incredibly impressive, playing in such a high-tempo offense, especially under Deion Sanders and the Colorado Buffaloes, right? This is a player that is just incredibly impressive at everything he does on the football field. He is someone that should win the Heisman far and away, and I think that having 2 of the 3 Player of the Year awards says a lot. He also won one of the 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards. That one, probably by the AP. The other one, he won the Bednar Trophy for the best defensive player. He didn't, interestingly, win the best secondary. He wasn't nominated for that, which is a little bit weird. But Kyle Kennard won the other Defensive Player of the Year, that one given out by the Football Writers Association of America. There's lots of different awards to give out. There's lots of different companies and corporations that make these votings. The one that really matters, it's going to be the Heisman at the end of the day, and I think the AP Player of the Year is the one that matters the most. We're going with Travis Hunter to win the Heisman this year, and I don't think it's going to be that close. Good effort by Ashton Jeanty. He had an incredible season. He beat out the other 2 quarterbacks, Cam Ward and Dylan Gabriel, that were right behind them. And that's a success in his own right. But we're going with Travis Hunter, the 2-way phenom and the best player in college football, to win the Heisman Trophy. But let me know what you think. Who's going to win the Heisman Trophy? Were any awards way wrong? Let me know what your thoughts are. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we break down the Army-Navy game, a massive game, the only game this weekend. We'll talk about that and more coming up next here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Friday, December 13th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the college football awards, a couple of snubs in the Bolitnikov and the Jake Mackey trophy for the best tight end and the best wide receiver in the country. Outside of that, not too many issues on my part. In this segment, we turn our attention to the one and only college football game this weekend, that being the Army-Navy game. Army favored by 6 in this one, and maybe one of the more anticipated matchups between these teams in a very long time. They both had really good seasons. We'll break it down, who I think is going to win and why, in just a second. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Friday, December 13th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into that Army-Navy game. This is a massive matchup between these two squads. This is maybe the most anticipated version of the Army-Navy game that we have seen in quite some time. It's not too often that both of them get ranked in the same year, let alone at the same time, at least in recent memory. Army, of course, finishes the season ranked number 22. They get a massive bowl game after winning the American champion. Their first time winning the American championship in their first year in the conference. A huge season for them. These two teams do it in pretty similar ways, right? Army, I think, pretty undoubtedly is the better team right now. They're favored by 6 in this matchup. They do it on the ground. They will ground and pound you, run that triple option right at you. Their quarterback still has that ability to beat you through the air, but these military service schools, a lot of the time, the way that they win football games is through the ground game, which is kind of similar for Navy. 133 for Navy, right? 133 carries on the season for their top running back, 118 passes for their quarterback. Now, it's to another degree when we talk about Army, right? 264 carries for their top running back and 29 touchdowns is crazy. He's also their quarterback, right? 29 touchdowns on the ground. He's only thrown the ball 78 times. About 50% completion percentage, almost 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns, only 1 interception. Very similar kind of breakdown for both of these squads. So it's going to be a fast-paced, I think kind of low-scoring ball control game, but I think Army, they just do it a little bit better than Navy does. It's really what this game is going to come down to is which one of these teams holds the ball last, or which one of them gets the first 2 possession lead. Because if one of these two teams pulls ahead by 2 possessions, neither of these teams can really play from behind. And that's really all you need to know about this game. This is a game that's going to be physical. It's going to be quintessential Army versus Navy. It's going to be ground and pound. It's going to be just in the trenches kind of football, and it's going to be a lot of fun to watch this Saturday. I cannot wait to see what happens tomorrow in this game. I'm taking Army to win this one. I do think it'll be a little bit closer. I don't know if the defenses will really be able to stop it, or if the defense will just be too good, because that's what they practice against, right? They're practicing against the triple option. That's what they're going to have to face this week. It's the same offense versus the same offense, and who is going to run it better? I'm leaning towards Army in this one. They've been more potent all season. They're 11-1, Navy 9-3. Both of them have losses to Notre Dame, which is kind of where you can point the finger and say, hey, this is where the difference is going to be. Notre Dame beat Navy 51-14 when they played each other. Notre Dame beat Army 49-14. So if we're taking that math, right, and it's not going to be perfect, the way we're looking at it is we're looking at an Army win, but by a very, very short margin. They both scored the same amount of points. Navy just gave up 2 more. So I'm taking Army to win this game by a final score of 20-18. I think that's what it's going to come down to. I think it's going to be a tough one. I cannot wait to see what happens. Should be a lot of fun. Just the same offenses running back and forth against each other. But let me know what you think. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, 2 massive trades in the MLB. The Astros make a huge trade, and so do the Yankees. We'll talk about that and more coming up next here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Friday, December 13th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the Army-Navy game, seeing Army favored by 6 in this one. In this segment, we turn our attention to baseball. 2 massive trades take place for 2 of the biggest names in all of the sport. We will talk about that and more coming up in just a second. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those 2 things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Friday, December 13th. We're going to finish off our show here talking a little bit about MLB baseball. It's been a big topic recently with the winter meetings coming and going earlier this week. Lots of big trades, lots of big signings as the offseason really has started to heat up. But now we get 2 more massive pieces of news. And we're going to start off with the first one. Devin Williams, one of the best closers in all of baseball since he made his debut. He ranks in the top 5 of all closers, of all bullpen pitchers that have the qualifying numbers in just about every major stat. He is a strikeout machine. He is one of the best closers in all of baseball right now. The Brewers let a guy who perennially was considered the best closer in all of baseball, Josh Hader, go in favor of Devin Williams. Now, that relationship has soured due to a little bit of the arbitration hearings. Now they move him. Devin Williams was a guy that was always going to be on the move this offseason, but he lands on the Yankees. And I think the Yankees absolutely fleeced the Brewers on this one. The Brewers get Nestor Cortez, a guy who's dealt with some injuries, had a couple of good seasons in there, is a fine pitcher, not really worth Devin Williams, and Caleb Durbin, right? Caleb Durbin is a utility player, kind of built like Jose Altuve, 5'6". He's got a lot of speed. He can play just about anywhere on the infield. He's an interesting prospect, draws a lot of walks, doesn't strike out as much as he walks. That's important. But the Brewers in this are giving up one of, if not the best closer in all of baseball for just about nothing. We saw closers at the trade deadline last year go for incredibly high prices. The Padres gave up a lot to go get Tanner Scott from the Marlins. Now Devin Williams just goes for a bag of chips, really. And it's a little bit more than a bag of chips. I think Caleb Durbin could turn into something. And Nestor Cortez is a guy that I like, but he's not really going to turn that around. Now the Yankees add him to the back end of the bullpen. They add Devin Williams to the back end of the bullpen, one that was kind of a little bit weak at times. You had a guy in Clay Holmes who potentially could be a starter now that you have a real closer. That's something that he came up into the league as. He went out and became a closer. He's got the stuff to do it, but he doesn't strike out guys like most closer does. He pitches to contact, and it can get him into jams sometimes. So we're looking at a guy in Devin Williams that is going to completely change the way that we look at the back end of that Yankees bullpen. Maybe it helps shore up that back end of the Yankees starting rotation too. I think the way that the Yankees have handled this offseason after losing Soto is incredibly impressive. They're going out and they're being aggressive. They get Max Fried on a big contract. They go out and they get potentially the best closer in all of baseball in Devin Williams for not that much, really. That's a huge win for them. This is the Yankees team that they still need to get some bats to replace Juan Soto's offensive input. That pitching staff is going to be super, super dangerous, and pitching wins games. That's going to be something that's going to be able to propel them all season long. The other big trade that took place, Kyle Tucker. This one kind of came out of nowhere for me. The Astros and Kyle Tucker have been dark horse MVP candidate right there for the last couple of seasons. Now, last year he was dealing with some injuries, but he's still one of the more consistent guys on the Astros, but his name isn't brought up that much. He came in after the whole cheating scandal, but he's been huge for them, keeping them afloat. Him and the Astros have been an incredible pair, right? He's hitting just about near the top of the league in every single category. He's a guy that's consistently going to get you 4 or 5 wins in a season based on his WAR. This is a guy that's incredibly impressive offensively, and trading him to the Cubs for Isaac Paredes, I don't know how much that really helps the Astros. I know they were looking at replacing, getting a third baseman. There was lots of conversation around that, but outside of that, you get a couple of prospects. Cam Smith, a third base prospect. Hayden Washneski, a right-handed pitching prospect. I don't love what this new GM and front office for the Astros has been doing as of late. This is a new reign. After they made it to the ALCS last time, 2 years ago now, they completely fired everybody. The staff is gone. And they're making lots of mistakes. I think they lost the trade deadline. As good as Kikuchi was, they gave up way too much for him, and now he's gone. He's not coming back. That was a rental. You gave up way too much for him. And Kyle Tucker is a guy that, yeah, he's a little bit older, but you needed a bigger return for him. He is a guy that has been arguably your best player in the last couple of seasons when he's healthy and on the field. That is a lot to give up, and I don't think you got enough back in that process. This should make the Cubs a whole lot better. You won't have to rely on a guy like Cody Bellinger, who should stay this season, as much. Kyle Tucker is going to add much needed relief to that offense and defense. He's a guy that I think turns this Cubs squad around almost immediately. I think they're now playoff contenders. That was a huge, huge get for them, and I just don't understand what the Astros are doing. I think the Yankees absolutely won that trade, and I think the Cubs destroyed that trade as well. The guys that are getting these established stars, as uninformed as that might sound, I think they absolutely fleeced both the Astros and the Brewers. But let me know what you think of these trades. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in to today's show, Friday the 13th show. Hope everybody has a great weekend. Go enjoy everything that's happening as we get halfway through December already. We will be back same time, same place on Monday, talking everything that happened this weekend. Can't wait to talk about that then. You all have a good one. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn it.